In a media firestorm few could have predicted, Meghan Markle finds herself at the center of a satirical takedown that has spiraled far beyond comedy. When South Park aired a parody episode mocking the Duchess and her relentless pursuit of privacy, the fallout was instant and explosive. What began as a cartoon joke has become a cultural flashpoint, exposing deep cracks in Meghan's carefully crafted image, and her reported demand to ban the episode may have done more harm than good. The cartoon that sparked a royal crisis. When South Park aired its now infamous worldwide privacy tour episode, no one quite anticipated the scale of reaction it would generate, least of all from the Duchess herself. Meghan Markle, once lauded as a modern breath of fresh air within the royal institution, was suddenly thrust back into public scrutiny, but not by a tabloid expose or royal insider leak, by a cartoon. In the episode, a character blatantly modeled after Meghan, named Maxilla, storms through scenes, preaching her desire for privacy while doing everything in her power to stay in the spotlight. The satire was razor-sharp, pulling no punches in its depiction of hypocrisy and self-importance. But it wasn't just the cartoon's mocking tone that caught attention. It was Meghan's reported reaction. Instead of ignoring the jab or brushing it off with good humor, sources say she responded with fury, allegedly pushing to have the episode removed from circulation entirely. This wasn't the first time Meghan found herself under the microscope, but it may have been the most culturally resonant. Unlike past critiques framed as tabloid attacks or royal sabotage, this came from a universally irreverent show that has skewered everyone from world leaders to pop icons since its debut in 1997. Trey Parker and Matt Stone, the show's creators, are infamous for their no-holds-barred approach to satire, and they didn't spare the former royals. The backlash to Meghan's reaction was immediate. By attempting to suppress the episode, she unintentionally validated its message. The attempt to silence only amplified the noise. Online forums exploded, talk shows debated her response, hashtags trended for days. What started as a 30-minute cartoon quickly became a cultural moment, raising deeper questions about fame, entitlement, and the limits of public control in the digital age. Meghan's meltdown becomes the real story. If the cartoon mocked her, Meghan Markle's response made her the headline. Rather than let the satire pass, like countless other celebrity parodies, reports claim she was deeply upset, even overwhelmed by the portrayal. The character, Maxilla, was depicted as a self-absorbed diva, stomping around demanding privacy while starring in media appearances, writing tell-all books, and chasing Netflix deals. But the outrage didn't stop at feeling offended. Sources allege Meghan actively sought to have the episode banned. That effort, whether rooted in pride, principle, or public relations strategy, quickly became the focal point. Not the show's content, not the creators, but Meghan's inability to laugh, or at least disengage. The attempt to control the narrative only exposed the vulnerability she was desperate to hide. In a world where satire is protected speech and cultural commentary, trying to silence a cartoon is like throwing gasoline on a media fire. It's impossible to win, and in doing so, Meghan reignited debates around her authenticity and her repeated desire to reshape her public image. The irony didn't go unnoticed. For years, Meghan and Prince Harry have insisted they simply want privacy, a chance to live away from the intense scrutiny of royal life. Yet they have continued to appear in high-profile interviews, documentaries, books, and podcasts. The contradiction between their public complaints and their private actions became the very fuel that South Park turned into comedy gold. And Meghan's reaction confirmed what the episode implied, that beneath the glossy exterior lies a deep intolerance for criticism. For many viewers, this wasn't just entertainment, it was vindication. The satire cut too close to the bone, and her disproportionate response became proof to critics that the cartoon had struck a nerve. What could have been a blip on the cultural radar had now turned into a full-blown PR crisis. Meghan wasn't mocked for her ideals. She was mocked for her contradictions, and by trying to erase the episode, she only underscored them. The monster metaphor that hit too close to home. One of the most jarring elements of the South Park episode was its unflinching use of metaphor. Meghan Markle's parody character, Maxilla, was portrayed as a destructive, larger-than-life monster. A chaotic force tearing through everything in her path while proclaiming to be a victim. For casual viewers, the depiction may have seemed over the top, but for many critics and longtime royal watchers, it was a brutal reflection of how Meghan's public behavior has been perceived over the past several years. The monster wasn't just a cartoon. It was a metaphor for the aftermath of her choices. The family rifts, the staff resignations, the media spats, the public meltdowns. Each scene of Maxilla stomping through fictionalized royal and Hollywood landscapes felt like a satirical mirror held up to the real-life drama. And the show didn't stop there. It painted Meghan as someone more focused on optics than substance, crafting an image of a social justice warrior while, in the show's eyes, orchestrating a global PR blitz that seemed increasingly out of touch with ordinary people. From the victimhood branding to her carefully staged moments of vulnerability, South Park implied that Meghan's efforts were less about real change and more about controlling the spotlight. This portrayal sparked a conversation that extended far beyond the usual royal gossip circles. Social media, podcast panels, and editorial columns all jumped into the fray, debating not just whether the satire was fair, but whether it was accurate. What made this monster metaphor so effective and so devastating was that it didn't rely on scandalous new information. It simply exaggerated what was already in plain sight. And that's what hurt most. For someone so invested in managing perception, being reduced to a cartoon caricature laid bare the cracks in her image. Meghan's attempt to shut it down wasn't viewed as damage control. It was viewed as proof of ego. And once the monster metaphor took hold, no PR strategy could contain it. The line between parody and reality had blurred, and Meghan's reaction made that line vanish entirely. The hypocrisy that satire couldn't resist. Perhaps the sharpest sting in the South Park episode came from its central accusation: hypocrisy. The cartoon zeroed in on Meghan Markle and Prince Harry's public stance that they crave privacy, while simultaneously participating in a relentless media campaign. It called this out with biting humor, mocking their high-profile interviews, best-selling memoirs, Netflix series, and endless news coverage. The character Maxilla and her prince declared they wanted to be left alone, all while waving signs, attending red carpet events, and writing exposés. For many viewers, it was less about comedy and more about catharsis, a satirical reckoning of a contradiction that had long frustrated the public. The parody put into cartoon form what many had quietly questioned since the couple's departure from royal duties in early 2020. If they truly wanted privacy, why the 6-hour docuseries? Why the global book tour? Why the constant spotlight? These weren't just media appearances. They were coordinated campaigns, crafted by high-paid public relations teams, marketed for global consumption. And while Meghan and Harry have framed their actions as a way to control their narrative, critics saw a double standard. They shunned invasive press coverage, but eagerly shared intimate details on platforms of their choosing. They criticized the British monarchy for lack of transparency, yet remained vague and often contradictory in their own public claims. This contradiction became South Park's goldmine. The show took the absurdity and dialed it up, creating a cartoon couple desperate for attention while demanding silence from the world. What made it cut deeper was how closely the satire mirrored real-life actions. The cartoon wasn't about fictional villains. It was an echo of real behavior. And Meghan's reported attempt to silence the episode only added fuel to the fire. The satire wasn't just funny, it was relevant. And when real-life Meghan reacted exactly as the show predicted, the hypocrisy wasn't just exposed, it was confirmed. In the world of public perception, that confirmation landed with more impact than any joke ever could. The PR machine that couldn't handle a cartoon? Behind Meghan Markle's public image lies a sophisticated, carefully managed public relations machine, one that has worked tirelessly since her royal departure to position her as a modern humanitarian icon. With multi-million-dollar deals, curated magazine covers, Netflix documentaries, and strategic interviews, every step seemed scripted, filtered, and choreographed to reinforce a brand of empowerment, resilience, and global relevance. But when South Park launched its parody, all that polished planning was upended by 30 minutes of animated satire. And perhaps more damaging than the cartoon itself was the PR meltdown that followed. Meghan's alleged attempt to have the episode banned wasn't seen as strength, it was seen as fragility. And it exposed just how ill-equipped her tightly controlled image was to deal with the one thing it couldn't manipulate: ridicule. The irony is palpable. In a media age where perception often outweighs reality, Meghan's brand was crafted to be bulletproof. Her team had successfully steered her through royal exit backlash, accusations of bullying, and critical commentary by focusing on her narrative of victimhood and triumph. But satire doesn't follow press releases, and cartoons don't answer to crisis communications. When South Park aired its episode, it spoke directly to the public, and they listened. The image Meghan had spent years cultivating began to wobble, not because of the show itself, but because of how she responded. Silence would have been strategic. A joke would have been disarming. But an attempt to censor? That was gasoline on the fire. What the cartoon mocked was the overmanagement of Meghan's persona, and the real-world fallout only validated the criticism. Her brand, once untouchable and media-savvy, suddenly seemed fragile and over-rehearsed. Her reaction revealed not a victim of unjust scrutiny, but a public figure unable to let go of control. And when a brand built on grace under pressure collapses under a joke, the message is clear. The PR machine wasn't built to handle being laughed at, and in that moment, the curtain was pulled back, not on Meghan's critics, but on Meghan herself. The collapse of a carefully curated persona. For years, Meghan Markle's rise from television actress to global figure has been defined by image control. From her philanthropic messaging to her media choices, every appearance, quote, and project seemed tailored to reinforce a narrative of transformation, of a woman who overcame obstacles, rose above outdated institutions, and used her platform for good. But satire has a way of cutting past messaging, and the South Park episode didn't just poke fun, it shredded the image. Through the character Maxilla, it portrayed Meghan not as an inspiring figure, but as a walking contradiction, desperate for attention while claiming to shun it, promoting empowerment while centering every conversation around herself. The show's most devastating move wasn't its exaggeration, it was how recognizable the parody felt. Maxilla wasn't a stretch. She was a reflection. Critics and audiences alike noticed how closely the cartoon mirrored public frustrations, the endless interviews, the selective vulnerability, the victimhood narrative that seemed to conveniently follow every commercial endeavor. Meghan's real-life reaction, instead of diffusing the situation, only fed into the very caricature South Park had created. What should have been just another late-night punchline became a referendum on her entire public persona. The fallout was swift and brutal. Online commentators, influencers, and even mainstream journalists began to question whether the carefully maintained brand could survive under this kind of scrutiny. It wasn't just a cartoon episode anymore, it was a cultural turning point. Meghan's alleged outrage painted her not as a strong, confident woman, but as someone deeply shaken by the inability to steer the public conversation. The more she tried to regain control, the more the narrative slipped through her fingers. And perhaps most telling of all, the public didn't rush to defend her. Sympathy was replaced by skepticism. Admiration gave way to fatigue. The persona that once stood as a symbol of modern royalty now appeared increasingly artificial. In trying to preserve her image, Meghan may have inadvertently revealed its most fragile flaw, its dependence on being taken seriously at all times. And satire, by its nature, refuses to play by those rules. The satirical scalpel that exposed real wounds. What set this South Park episode apart from the usual comedic jabs was how precise its satire was. It didn't rely on crude jokes or absurd exaggerations. It focused on the contradictions and behaviors that have followed Meghan Markle since her entrance into royal life. From her high-profile interviews to the infamous Oprah sit-down in early 2021, Meghan has built her image on speaking truth to power. But the South Park portrayal flipped that script. It painted her not as a silenced outsider, but as a media-savvy operator obsessed with control, image, and headlines. For many viewers, the satire didn't come across as parody, it felt more like commentary. And that's what made it so powerful. The episode included fictional scenes where Maxilla demands privacy while simultaneously pitching a tell-all memoir and staging media appearances. It highlighted the glaring double standard, demanding discretion from others while putting one's own story on display for profit. This wasn't an attack on activism or personal freedom. It was a reflection of how Meghan's actions often conflict with her message. The satire didn't invent this narrative. It simply connected the dots that critics have been pointing to for years. But what deepened the blow was Meghan's attempt to bury the episode. Instead of weathering the storm or responding with a clever retort, she reportedly tried to silence it altogether. That move gave the satire more credibility than it could ever achieve on its own. It proved that the cracks weren't just visible, they were real. The media storm that followed wasn't just about comedy. It became a debate over censorship, entitlement, and the limits of public criticism in an age where every celebrity brands themselves as a moral compass. For Trey Parker and Matt Stone, the episode was business as usual. For Meghan, it became a symbol of losing the one thing she fought hardest to control: the narrative. The satire didn't just sting, it carved through the armor of perfection. And when that happened, what emerged wasn't scandal, it was something far more damaging: doubt. The cultural backlash Meghan didn't anticipate. What Meghan Markle perhaps underestimated most was not the cartoon's reach, but the cultural moment it tapped into. By the time the South Park episode aired, public sentiment had already begun to shift. While many once viewed Meghan as a fresh, necessary voice challenging the archaic traditions of the monarchy, fatigue had quietly set in. Interviews, documentaries, book deals, all delivered under the banner of victimhood, had begun to wear thin. The South Park creators didn't invent that exhaustion, they simply reflected it, and with brutal accuracy. Their parody didn't just mock Meghan's contradictions, it crystallized public skepticism that had been growing for years. This backlash didn't erupt in a vacuum. Since stepping back from royal duties in early 2020, Meghan and Prince Harry have continuously occupied media headlines, often by their own design. Yet, they've also insisted on privacy and demanded distance from public intrusion. This contradiction has been noted and debated, but until South Park exaggerated it to cartoonish extremes, no single piece of media had so succinctly captured that dissonance. Viewers didn't just laugh, they nodded in recognition. The satire landed not because it was wildly creative, but because it distilled years of public perception into one coherent, cutting critique. And Meghan's reported reaction, her fury, her alleged demand for the episode to be removed, only intensified the fallout. Instead of prompting sympathy, it triggered eye rolls. Instead of shifting the narrative, it cemented it. Her outrage wasn't read as righteous. It was interpreted as proof. Proof that the Duchess who once captivated the world with her boldness and charm now seemed insecure and overly reactive. And proof that the satire had done its job, not merely to entertain, but to expose. The cultural backlash wasn't driven by royalists or haters. It came from the middle, the casual observers, the viewers who had once cheered Meghan on, but now found themselves questioning the script. The cartoon didn't just skewer a public figure, it sparked a reckoning. And Meghan's brand, so carefully polished over years, began to dull under the spotlight of satire. Maxilla as a mirror Meghan couldn't face. What made the South Park episode unforgettable wasn't just the humor or the boldness, it was the symbolism. Maxilla, Meghan Markle's cartoon counterpart, wasn't drawn as just another celebrity exaggeration. She was designed as a mirror. Loud, entitled, demanding, image-obsessed, the character embodied everything critics had been saying about Meghan for years, but in a form impossible to ignore or explain away. And while many public figures have endured South Park parodies and laughed them off or remained silent, Meghan's reported attempt to censor the episode suggested something deeper. She recognized herself in it, and she didn't like what she saw. The satire painted Maxilla as the architect of her own chaos, a woman who alienates allies, destroys goodwill, and explodes at the slightest pushback, all while presenting herself as the ultimate victim. It showed her tearing through public life with carefully rehearsed grievances and curated tears, incapable of reflecting on the wreckage left behind. For Meghan, who has spent years cultivating a brand centered on empathy, activism, and reinvention, the portrayal wasn't just mocking, it was deeply destabilizing. It reduced her complex global persona to a punchline, and in doing so, it laid bare the contradictions her critics have highlighted from the start. Her inability or unwillingness to let it go turned satire into scandal. Her demand to pull the episode didn't project power, it broadcast fragility. In a culture where public figures are routinely mocked, ridiculed, and memed, attempting to block a cartoon became a cardinal sin. It wasn't just bad optics, it was the exact behavior the show predicted. The moment Maxilla stormed across the screen, demanding the world take her seriously, Meghan's own fury echoed that same energy. The character wasn't just parodying Meghan, it was preempting her reaction. And when real-life Meghan responded in line with the script, fiction and reality blurred. Maxilla became more than a cartoon character. She became a symbol of overexposure, of miscalculation, and of a woman so fixated on her image that she forgot the power of self-awareness. And that, more than any line in the script, struck a nerve the cameras could never hide. The satirical fallout that may have changed everything. In the end, the South Park episode titled Worldwide Privacy Tour did more than mock Meghan Markle, it dismantled the foundation of her public image. What was once viewed as a carefully curated brand of strength, reinvention, and activism now seemed riddled with contradiction, irony, and overexposure. The backlash wasn't just about laughter, it was about reckoning. And Meghan's response, reportedly filled with outrage and a desire to have the episode removed, only deepened the crisis. It signaled not just discomfort with satire, but an unwillingness to confront the deeper truths behind it. The cartoon became a cultural scalpel, slicing through the layers of PR, sound bites, and photo ops to reveal something far more fragile underneath. By trying to silence the episode, Meghan didn't diminish its impact, she magnified it. The moment she reportedly pushed for censorship, the parody was no longer just comedy, it became commentary. The public, already skeptical after years of heavily managed appearances and emotionally charged interviews, now saw something they couldn't unsee. A person so consumed with control that even a cartoon could trigger a full-blown media meltdown. The gap between her message and her actions widened, and in that space, trust began to erode. The satire didn't invent that tension, it illuminated it. In an era where authenticity reigns, Meghan's brand of tightly wrapped vulnerability and picture-perfect storytelling no longer resonates the way it once did. The Maxilla character wasn't a distortion, it was a warning, a portrait of what happens when narrative becomes obsession and criticism is treated as betrayal. Her reaction showed that she wasn't ready to laugh at herself or to let go of the script. And in the public eye, that lack of self-awareness often reads as entitlement. As the dust settles, Meghan faces a hard truth. Satire, no matter how uncomfortable, is part of public life. You can't pick and choose which parts of fame you want to keep. And when you try to shut down a joke, you often end up becoming the punchline. The Maxilla episode may be wrapped in animation, but its impact was as real as it gets. For Meghan Markle, it wasn't just a cartoon controversy. It was a turning point and possibly a point of no return.